The crisis of the 3rd century was not a particularly great time to be a Roman. This was a roughly 50-year period in the middle of the 3rd century where the empire began to burst at the seams. The empire saw numerous invasions across its northern frontiers and a resurgent power in Iran under the Sasanians. There was a constant shortage of manpower to maintain the army and the empire's defenses. The currency was debased to pay what soldiers were available, which led to inflation across the empire. Land, and consequently wealth, was increasingly concentrated in the hands of a few powerful landowners who maintained fortified estates. The rich got richer, and the poor got poorer. So, how did the mighty Roman Empire get there? And what started their precipitous decline? There are a lot of factors which contributed to the empire becoming fragile enough to begin collapsing as it did in the early 3rd century. But setting aside those various factors, the historical facts which triggered the crisis began in the early spring of 235 in Mainz. The Emperor Severus Alexander had campaigned against Germanic tribes which had repeatedly crossed the border into Roman territory and had terrorized the countryside, including the homes of some of Alexander's soldiers. Instead of waging a brutal campaign of revenge, like the soldiers wanted, Alexander negotiated with the tribes, which did not sit well with the army. In response, Alexander and his mother were assassinated, likely in March of 235. The soldiers of the army raised one of their own to the position of emperor, a man known to history as Maximinus Thrax, or Maximinus the Thracian. Maximinus' heritage is not clear, but ancient sources relay that he was widely regarded as having barbarian ancestry, and so he was immediately reviled by the Senate. This is almost certainly not true, but he did come from a lower social class, which did lead to the senatorial class to resent him. Perhaps most notably, he was the first of the so-called barracks emperors. This is a term historians use to refer to the men who were, like Maximinus, elevated to the role of emperor based on their role and leadership within the military as opposed to any other dynastic claim or civil service background. These emperors ruled only as long as their military successes permitted and were usually short-lived. Maximinus accepted the title of emperor, but he never actually went to Rome. Instead, in 235, he promised massive pay raises to the soldiers, and he remained to campaign against the Germanic tribes as the soldiers had wished. In early 236, he marched to Sirmium in Pannonia, and during the course of 236 and 237, he was engaged in campaigns against the Dacians and Sarmatians, while the Sasanians invaded to the east. To keep his campaign promise, he increased the pay of his soldiers, which meant he had to increase taxes across the empire, a policy that was as popular then as it is now. The new taxes were deeply unpopular, especially in the parts of the empire where foreign threats were generally considered far away. In the spring of 238, the people of North Africa revolted, killing the procurator. Fearing imperial retribution, the people elevated Marcus Antonius Gordianus Sempronianus, better known as Gordian I, to the role of emperor. He was at least 80 at the time. Gordian I elevated his son, also named Marcus Antonius Gordianus Sempronianus, to the position of co-emperor, and is known to the modern audience as Gordian II. In early April of 238, Gordian's envoy to the Senate, the future Emperor Valerian, arrived with news of the revolt and the proclamation of Gordian as emperor. The Senate confirmed the two Gordians as emperor, meaning Maximinus Thrax was no longer recognized as Augustus by the Senate. At this point, several things happened simultaneously during the month of April. First, several provinces recognized the Senate's recognition of the co-emperors, meaning the empire split between those loyal to the Senate and the Gordians and those still loyal to Maximinus. In response, Maximinus moved from Sirmium and headed towards Rome. Meanwhile, in Numidia, the governor was loyal to Maximinus, and he marched the only Roman legion in the area toward Carthage where the two Gordians were. In the so-called Battle of Carthage, at some time in the third week of April 238, Gordian II led an army of untrained militia against the battle-hardened Roman legion. Gordian II was killed in battle. Upon hearing the news, his father hung himself with his own belt. Gordian I and Gordian II reigned for 22 days, the shortest reign of any Roman emperor up to that point or since. The Senate was left without their emperors, and an angry Maximinus Thrax continued to march toward the capital with ill intentions directed towards the senators. In response, sometime in late April, the Senate elevated 2 of its own members to the role of co-emperors. The first was named Decimus Caelius Calvinus Balbinus, known to history as Balbinus. The second was Marcus Clodius Pupienus Maximus, known to history as Pupienus. Yes, Pupienus. The people of Rome did not approve of the Senate's shenanigans. The people of the city, supported by the Praetorian Guard, rioted in support of Gordian II's nephew, known as Gordian III. The Senate acquiesced and gave Gordian III the title of Caesar, a tacit admission that he would be the successor of the elderly senators Balbinus and Pupienus. Maximinus continued his march toward Rome. However, he had to stop to besiege Aquileia. He was, however, low on supplies, and the siege was not going particularly well. Pupienus marched north from Rome to Ravenna to organize a resistance. He mustered an army composed mostly of Germanic auxiliaries, including a bodyguard of German soldiers responsible only to Pupienus. Maximinus' soldiers were unhappy. They were worried about their fortunes as civil war loomed. They were worried about their own families in the line of fire, and so in either late May or June, they assassinated Maximinus and his son. Pupienus marched back to Rome with his new Germanic bodyguard. Balbinus was suspicious of his co-emperor, and likely for good reason. The city of Rome had civil unrest. The people, in particular the soldiers, and especially the Praetorian Guards, were disaffected by the sequence of events. Over the course of July and into August, the tensions rose between the two emperors. If the historians of the day are to be believed, Balbinus and Pupienus were arguing back and forth about one trying to assassinate the other when the Praetorian Guard burst into the room, took them out of the palace, tortured and killed them in a bathhouse. They reigned 99 days. One historian of the time argues the senators were doomed from the start.
The soldiers were seething with anger inside. They disliked the acclaim given by the people, actually disapproved of the noble birth of the two men, and hated having emperors chosen by the Senate.
The Praetorian Guard proclaimed the young Gordian III emperor, claiming to be doing the will of the people. The year 238 started with one emperor, and in the course of about 5 months, 5 emperors were killed, and the 6th, a small child and ill-suited to ruling, was raised to the throne as a puppet of the Praetorian Guard. This disastrous year really set off what would become called the crisis of the 3rd century, a roughly 50-year period where everything went from bad to worse. Natural disasters, civil wars, and foreign invasions led to economic crises and decreased agricultural output, which led to periodic food shortages. There were brief periods of relief, as under Aurelian, but the decline was only arrested with the rise of Diocletian in 284. But the empire that existed before the crisis was gone, and what remained would never be the same.